The sermon title I have is When Trouble Comes. One of the most realistic stories in the Bible is the story of the Job and his troubles. One of the more realistic. Job was a good and righteous man whom God blessed abundantly. God blessed him with, and I was counting all these tens, how many tens there, and what is the reason the author makes number 10 every time. Okay, watch this one. God blessed him with 7 sons, 3 daughters. Total number 10. God blessed Job with 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels. 7 plus 3, 10. It's a number of perfection. Furthermore, God blessed Job with 5,000 yoke of oxen and 5,000 donkeys. Again, 10, number 10. The writer of Job wants to make it perfectly clear that Job was especially blessed by God. Indeed, we are told that Job was the greatest of all people of the East. He was so wealthy that each of his sons had an establishment of his own. And they had a family feast each day, with the sons taking turns to host the feast. This too is another sign of a blessing, children getting along well. There was harmony in his family. Furthermore, the biblical text underscores the fact that Job was just as righteous as he was rich and just as good as he was great. This is a thing to catch, to notice. The gaining material blessings, he did not compromise his soul, as many people would do. They would sell their soul for gain, material gains. In fact, Job was as good and righteous that he had the distinction of having God brag on him. Have you tested Job? He's righteous, he's blameless, he fears God. Okay, so I was thinking, I wish God would brag on me. And yet, here is a man who was chosen to experience unbelievable pain and suffering. And the reason he was chosen to experience these tragic circumstances was that he was blameless and upright. He feared God and rejected sin. You know the story of Job. Job became, I read somewhere, a battleground for God and Satan. He became the battleground and lost everything he held dear. His family, his friends, his health, his wealth, everything lost. Nothing was spared except his life. Even his body, we heard, covered with sores. I want to think of us now, here in this room. No one in this room has suffered like Job, but a few of us may have come close. It may be a problem with our health, problem with somebody's love, problem for our workplace. If this describes your life, only you know, whatever that problem may be, there is a battle going on and you are not sure that you can endure. Next slide, please. You have slides? Oh, there it is. Lightning strikes Job. We read in chapter 1, which we skipped those verses, but 4 messengers come one after another, one telling, your sheep and camels have been stolen, your sons and children all went blew the house where they were feasting, and everyone of them is died. Your things have, so everything is gone. 4 messengers come, one after another, in a day's time. In some, within a brief period of time, everything that Job had worked for and cherished was lost, and with the exception of his wife. He was left poverty-stricken and alone. So here's the question. What would Job do now that trouble had come? Everybody knew what he did when things were going well. But now when the misery has struck, what would Job do? People want to see it. Well, Job's wife assessed this situation and offered Job a quick way out. You heard that. Curse God. Forget it. And die. Next slide, please. The Women's Bible Commentary notes on this I want to read. Job's wife is the one who recognizes long before Job himself does what is at stake theologically in innocent suffering. And this is what it is. The conflict between innocence and integrity on the one hand, and on an affirmation of the goodness of God on the other hand. Job did not follow the advice of his wife, but her words did challenge his thinking. He replied with a question, shall we receive good at the hand of the God and not receive the bad? Job's question is a question which acknowledges the reality of trouble in his life in spite of his righteousness. He knew that his righteousness did not necessarily exempt him from trouble. Now, there is a theology in this sentence. Do the bad only suffer, or do the righteous also suffer? That idea has prevailed from the beginning of humanity and even today. When you get sick or you get trouble, you start thinking, maybe I have done something wrong. Job's friends came to him and said, you must have sinned. So, is the righteous suffer because they have done something wrong? Or does God allow it as we hear it? So there is a theology in it. Job did not, okay, shall we receive? Job's question is a question which acknowledges the reality of trouble in his life in spite of his righteousness. Trouble is an equal opportunity employer. Theology in it, okay? Trouble is a democratic process which does not discriminate against anyone. Theology in it. That is why when I was giving the title to my sermon title is not if trouble comes, or trouble might come, but when trouble comes. Either we have just come out us, okay, just out of a storm, or we are in a storm maybe, or one is on the way. So always troubles come. Into every life, some rain must fall. Jesus never promised his disciples there'll be no trouble for you, okay? Remember that. Next slide, please. So the issue now Job was facing was not whether trouble also comes to the righteous. Trouble had already come to his life. The issue for Job was not what to do now that trouble had come, but I believe this, it was what happens to us is not as important as how we respond to it. One response available to Job was suggestion of his wife. And many accept that kind of thinking, okay, forget it, man. Leave God aside. Many accept that kind of response. I believe you would agree with me, more people give up on God in troubled times than in good times. Job could have resigned and given up his faith in God, as many in the past have done it and still do it. But Job did not. To such as these, God promises in the book of Revelation, be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. And Job did receive a crown of life. Read the whole book till the end, and you will discover that. Next slide, please. Story of I found this interesting, of our forefathers and foremothers, and these are slave people, black people, colored people, okay? I put here a little history lesson. Surely this was one of the response options available to African Americans in the face of the troubling contradictions. Watch the contradictions here, which challenged their faith in the midst of slavery. What were these troubling factors? They observed that many of the people who dealt in the slavery traffic were Christians. One of the famous hymn writers, Sir John Newton, made his money from the selling of the slaves to the New World. They were troubled by three things. Number one famous British slave vessel was named what? Jesus. Fact two, that troubled them. People who bought the slaves were Christians. Fact three, troubling fact, that many Christian ministers quoting St. Paul would justify slavery. Yet in the face of such troubling contradictions, our slave forefathers and foremothers, in their innocent suffering, did not resign and give up on God. To be sure, they had a stubborn faith that enabled them to discern the difference between the good of Christianity and the people who failed to practice it. This discernment is evident in the words of one of the songs they sang. I have got a robe, you have got a robe, all God's children got a robe. When I get to heaven, I'm going to put on that robe. Yes, I'll skip part of that song, I'll move on. And that is a song we sing here. What is that? It is well. What is it? Well with my soul. If you know the history behind the name of the guy, Horatio Spafford, Chicago businessman, attorney, well-established. First, he lost, in the big Chicago fire, he lost his property and a lot of stuff. To give his family good time, 2 years later, he sent them on a trip to Europe, shipwrecked. 4 of his daughters died. Wife called him, telling the story. He took the ship. When he reached that place, the pilot announced it. This is the place where the shipwreck, and that's where he wrote that hymn. It is well with my soul. Another little story of which I loved again. Some of you love tennis. Tennis player, former tennis player, Arthur Ashe. Heard of him? Unknowingly, innocently contracted AIDS through a blood transfusion when he underwent heart bypass. At that time, hospitals were not checking blood samples for the AIDS virus. He was told he had the virus when he had to go for a brain surgery. He had planned to keep this matter family secret, but news media forced him to confirm or deny the rumor. So, story came out. But here is what he said. He said he was tempted to ask, why me? But he said, if I were to say, God, why me, about the bad things, then I should have said, God, why me, when the good thing happened in my life? He said, why not me? Why should I be spared what some others have been infected with? And I have to think of all the good of my life, of having a great wife, family, friends, winning Wimbledon and the USA Open, playing for and coaching the Davis Cup team, and getting a free scholarship to UCLA. You could also ask about, why me? I have always had a religious faith, growing up in the South and having the church as a focal point of my life. Folks, my ending remark. This is the kind of faith that can rejoice and thank God even in the midst of trouble. This is the faith that can worship when trouble comes and celebrate a God who is stronger than any trouble that comes to us. And all the righteous people of God said, amen. Thank you. All right. It's my Luton.